Beneath the smoke and fire of a world at war lies a darkness few dare to confront. Secrets of sacrifice, shadows of desperation, and the moral horrors born in the crucible of conflict. As we open this hidden chapter, prepare to glimpse the faces behind the history, those caught between duty and despair, where every choice could mean death or damnation. Some stories were never meant to be told, but the past will not stay buried. In the quiet English countryside, tucked behind the unassuming walls of a Victorian manor, the government's best-kept secret was alive and humming. Bletchley Park, a sprawling estate near Milton Keynes, had become the nerve center for the Allied war effort's most vital intelligence breakthrough. Here, among hundreds of codebreakers, sat Eliza Harcourt, a young linguist whose sharp mind and relentless determination would quietly change the course of World War II. Eliza arrived at Bletchley in the summer of 1940, just as Britain braced itself against the onslaught of the Luftwaffe. The Battle of Britain was raging in the skies above, and every intercepted German radio message could mean the difference between life and death. Eliza's specialty was Germanic languages, but her talent went beyond mere translation. She had an uncanny ability to spot patterns and anomalies, the subtle linguistic fingerprints hiding within coded messages. Despite the urgency of their work, the atmosphere at Bletchley was oddly constrained. Secrecy was paramount. No one outside the estate could know what happened inside. The male-dominated staff often underestimated Eliza, a woman in her early 20s with a calm, unassuming demeanor. But as weeks turned to months, her contributions proved invaluable. She collaborated closely with mathematicians like Alan Turing and cryptographers who were pushing the boundaries of logic and machinery to crack the Enigma cipher. Eliza's breakthrough came one cold autumn evening in 1941. After months of frustration, she noticed a recurring phrase in the intercepted messages, a string of weather reports that seemed to contain a hidden key. By cross-referencing these with known German military movements, Eliza devised a method to predict the daily rotor settings of the Enigma machine. This discovery allowed the team to read encrypted messages hours before the Germans even sent their commands. The impact was immediate. When the Luftwaffe launched a massive attack during the Blitz, Bletchley's intelligence allowed the Royal Air Force to anticipate targets and deploy fighters with precision. British radar and Spitfires, guided by Eliza's decoded warnings, blunted the Nazi assault, preventing London from falling into chaos. Eliza never saw the battle firsthand, but she felt its weight in every sleepless night and every anxious morning at the decoding tables. As the war expanded to new fronts, Eliza's work evolved. By 1944, she was deeply involved in Operation Overlord, the Allied invasion of Normandy. Her team intercepted German communications that detailed troop deployments and reinforcements along the Atlantic Wall. The intelligence they provided was crucial to the success of D-Day, helping Allied commanders make split-second decisions on where to concentrate their forces and when to launch amphibious landings. Yet, the toll of secrecy was heavy. Eliza was forbidden to tell anyone, not family, not friends, about the vital role she played. Even after VE Day, she watched celebrations from afar, her accomplishments buried beneath layers of silence. The government's policy of absolute confidentiality meant her identity, and the identities of thousands like her, were lost in history for decades. Beyond the technical challenges, Eliza wrestled with the ethical complexities of her work. Each intercepted message represented real lives, enemy soldiers, civilians, and sometimes innocent families. She struggled to reconcile her role as a cog in the war machine with her innate empathy. The knowledge that her efforts saved countless lives brought comfort, but the understanding of war's brutal cost never faded. Eliza's story is also a window into the gender dynamics of wartime Britain. While Rosie the Riveter became an icon in the United States, women at Bletchley were often overlooked despite their indispensable skills. Eliza formed friendships with other women who balanced the pressures of wartime service with a hope for a peaceful future. They shared whispered conversations about their ambitions and frustrations, often fearing their contributions would be forgotten once peace returned. By the war's end, Bletchley Park had grown into a vast, complex operation with thousands of personnel working round the clock. The machinery built to break Enigma was a marvel of early computing, paving the way for future technological revolutions. But for Eliza and her colleagues, the true victory was knowing that their work helped shorten a conflict that had claimed millions of lives worldwide. After the war, Eliza pursued a quiet life, returning to academia and teaching languages. The secrecy oath she had sworn meant she could never publicly share her story. It wasn't until decades later, when government archives were declassified, that Eliza's contributions began to emerge from the shadows. Historians hailed the Codebreakers as unsung heroes whose intellect and courage were instrumental in defeating the Axis powers. Whispers of the Enigma reminds us that wars are not only fought on battlefields but also in hidden rooms where minds work tirelessly to outthink the enemy. Eliza Harcourt's journey reflects the countless individuals whose sacrifices and brilliance remain unsung. Her story is a testament to the power of intellect, perseverance, and the quiet heroism that helped turn the tide of history during the darkest hours of the Second World War. The winter of 1941 in Leningrad was unlike any the city had seen in generations. Bitter cold seeped into every crack of the ancient buildings, and the city's residents faced a siege that would last 900 days, one of the longest and deadliest in human history. For 12-year-old Sasha Ivanov, the siege was not just a headline or a distant fact. It was the harsh, unyielding reality of hunger, fear, and relentless bombardment that defined his every waking moment. Sasha lived with his mother, father, and little sister in a cramped apartment near the Neva River. Before the war, he was a lively boy who dreamed of becoming an engineer, fascinated by the factories and ships that dotted the city's skyline. But the invasion of Nazi Germany, launched in Operation Barbarossa, had transformed his home into a fortress under siege. The German armies encircled Leningrad, cutting off supply routes and leaving its citizens isolated in a frozen cage. The city's people quickly learned the brutal meaning of starvation. Food rationing was severe, every scrap counted. Sasha's family subsisted on a daily bread ration that dwindled to as little as 125 grams. His mother, once a schoolteacher, scavenged for any edible plants along the frozen banks of the river, while his father, a factory worker, volunteered for fire watch duty, fighting to keep the city's infrastructure intact under constant bombardment. Sasha's world was one of shadows. Shadows cast by the crumbling buildings, the blackouts enforced each night to thwart German bombers, and the shadow of death that lurked behind every corner. The relentless artillery shells and aerial raids shook the city, turning familiar streets into rubble. Friends and neighbors vanished, lost to hunger or bombs. Sasha learned early how to stay quiet during air raids, how to keep his sister calm when the bombs fell, and how to find small joys in a city that was slowly dying. Despite the hardships, the people of Leningrad refused to surrender. The spirit of resistance was palpable. Secret schools operated in basements, underground theaters staged performances to lift morale, and partisan fighters sabotaged enemy supply lines just beyond the city's perimeter. Sasha's mother taught him about the Soviet propaganda posters that adorned walls, symbols of strength and unity designed to rally the citizens against fascist invaders. "We fight not just for survival," she told him, "but for the future of our homeland." Winter after winter, the siege dragged on. The city's famed factories produced weapons and ammunition with skeleton crews, often working through the night by candlelight. Sasha's father returned home with frostbitten fingers and stories of comrades lost in the snow. The river that once bustled with barges became a frozen highway known as the Road of Life, a dangerous route over the ice that supplied the starving city with precious food and fuel. Each convoy was a gamble with death, as German planes circled overhead and ice cracked beneath heavy trucks. Sasha kept a small diary, writing in pencil on scraps of paper. His entries were simple but poignant, a child's perspective on a world turned upside down. He recorded moments of terror, like the night a bomb exploded near their apartment, shattering windows and filling rooms with dust. But he also wrote about small miracles, a neighbor sharing a handful of potatoes, the rare warmth of a soup kitchen, the camaraderie forged in the darkest days. As the siege wore on, the toll on the city became staggering. Hundreds of thousands perished from starvation and exposure. The mass graves outside the city walls grew deeper. Yet the Soviet leadership remained resolute. Joseph Stalin's order to hold Leningrad at all costs echoed through radio broadcasts, bolstering the determination of soldiers and civilians alike. Sasha's family listened to the speeches in hushed tones, clinging to hope despite the bleak reality. In the summer of 1943, a turning point arrived. The Soviet Army launched Operation Iskra, breaking the German blockade and opening a narrow land corridor to the city. The news brought a surge of relief, but the suffering was far from over. The siege would not officially end until January 1944, when Soviet forces pushed the Nazis fully away from Leningrad's outskirts. For Sasha, liberation was a complicated feeling. The city he returned to was battered and broken, scarred by years of deprivation. His family was thinner, quieter. But beneath the ruins, there was an unbreakable resilience, a stubborn refusal to let darkness define them. Schools reopened, factories resumed production, and life began to rebuild from the frozen ashes. Sasha's childhood was stolen by the siege, but his story became a testament to human endurance. His diaries, later preserved by his descendants, offer a rare and intimate glimpse into one of the most harrowing chapters of the Second World War. They remind us that behind every statistic of war lies a personal story of courage, loss, and hope. The siege of Leningrad was not just a military engagement, it was a crucible of survival and spirit. Through Sasha's eyes, we see the toll of war on the innocent, the power of community under siege, and the strength required to endure when all seems lost. His story is a living memory of a city that stood firm against the darkest storm, illuminating the resilience of the human heart amidst the shadows of war. Lieutenant Takashi Nakamura stood silently on the tarmac of a battered airstrip on Okinawa, his gaze fixed on the gray horizon where the Pacific Ocean met the blood-red sky of dawn. The war had dragged on for nearly 4 years, and now, in spring 1945, Japan's fate teetered on the edge. American forces had surged across the Pacific, capturing island after island, closing in on the home islands. The Imperial Japanese Navy had resorted to desperate measures, and Takashi was about to carry out one of the most extreme, a kamikaze mission. Takashi had not been born to die in a suicide attack. Raised in a quiet fishing village, he had once dreamed of flying for the love of the sky, of mastering the graceful dance of the Zero fighter plane. The early years of the war had been filled with hope and honor. He had trained with dedication, proud to serve Emperor Hirohito and protect his homeland. But as the war turned against Japan, the ideals he held began to crumble. The Kamikaze program was born from a mixture of patriotism, despair, and fanaticism. Pilots were taught that dying for the emperor was the highest honor, a sacred sacrifice to save Japan from humiliation and destruction. Takashi wrestled with this doctrine. His family had already suffered losses. His older brother had died in a naval battle years earlier. Now, as he prepared to crash his plane into an American aircraft carrier, he felt the crushing weight of conflicting emotions: duty, fear, sorrow, and a flicker of hope that somehow his sacrifice would make a difference. On the day of the mission, Takashi's squadron launched from their makeshift base amid the chaos of the Battle of Okinawa. The sky was thick with smoke and tracer fire. Radio chatter crackled with frantic reports of American ships closing in, the thunder of naval guns echoing across the waves. Takashi's heart pounded as he climbed into his Zero, the sleek silhouette gleaming dully under the overcast sky. As he soared toward the enemy fleet, memories flashed through his mind: the laughter of his childhood friends, his mother's gentle smile, the peaceful nights before the war. The training officer's words echoed: "You are the sword of the emperor, the last defense of our nation." Yet beneath the surface, Takashi felt a pang of doubt. Was this truly honor? Or was it desperation cloaked in tradition? The American fleet was a fortress of steel and firepower. Takashi's target was a massive aircraft carrier, bristling with anti-aircraft guns and fighter planes. He weaved through the barrage of flak, the deafening roar of explosions shaking his cockpit. Every second stretched into an eternity, his mind a storm of adrenaline and quiet resolve. At the final moment, Takashi locked his gaze on the carrier's deck and pulled the throttle forward. The plane surged toward the ship like a meteor of destruction. In those last seconds, time seemed to slow, and Takashi's thoughts shifted from mission to life, a silent prayer for his family, a hope that his death would spare others from suffering. The impact was catastrophic. The Zero crashed into the carrier's flight deck, igniting fuel stores and causing explosions that crippled the ship's operations. Takashi's sacrifice had achieved its grim purpose, delaying the American advance but at a terrible human cost. In the aftermath, survivors and American sailors recounted the terror and chaos caused by kamikaze attacks. These missions were devastating but ultimately could not turn the tide of war. Takashi's story was one among thousands, young men sent to die in a futile effort to protect a nation on the brink of defeat. Yet beyond the battlefield, Takashi's personal journey reveals the complexity of human spirit caught in the tides of war. He was a son, a brother, a pilot torn between loyalty and despair. Letters he wrote before his final flight, hidden away by comrades, spoke of dreams for peace and a yearning for life beyond the conflict. The kamikaze pilots were both instruments of a tragic ideology and individuals with hopes and fears. Their missions symbolized the extremes of sacrifice and the profound costs of fanaticism in war. Takashi Nakamura's last flight was not just a tactic of destruction, it was a reckoning with identity, honor, and the unbearable weight of war's final days. As the war ended and Japan faced devastation and occupation, the legacy of the kamikaze haunted the nation. Families mourned their lost sons, and society grappled with the meaning of sacrifice and the path to peace. Takashi's story, like those of many others, became a poignant reminder of the human cost behind the historical headlines, a testament to the fragile line between heroism and tragedy in the brutal theater of global conflict. Paris, 1942. The City of Lights had dimmed under the heavy shadow of Nazi occupation and the Vichy government's collaboration. The cafes were quieter, the streets patrolled by German soldiers, and fear hung thick in the air. Yet, beneath the surface of repression, a quiet rebellion was taking root, led not by generals or politicians, but by ordinary citizens willing to risk everything for freedom. Among them was Marie-Claire Dubois, a schoolteacher whose life would intertwine with the daring and dangerous world of the French resistance. Before the war, Marie-Claire had been devoted to her students and the ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity. But the swift fall of France and the establishment of the occupation shattered her peaceful existence. She watched helplessly as friends were rounded up for deportation, families torn apart, and her beloved country silenced beneath the boots of fascism. Refusing to accept defeat, she answered the call to resistance, an act that would transform her into a symbol of courage and defiance. Marie-Claire's initiation into the underground began with small acts, distributing clandestine newspapers, painting anti-Nazi graffiti on walls, and relaying secret messages. Her modest apartment became a hub for local resistors, a place where whispered plans were forged over cups of bitter coffee. She learned to navigate the shadows, disguising her true allegiance behind the veneer of normalcy. The French resistance was a patchwork of groups united by a common enemy but divided by ideology and geography. Marie-Claire worked closely with the Special Operations Executive, SOE, a British organization dedicated to supporting sabotage efforts in occupied Europe. Training in the use of explosives, radio equipment, and coded language, she transformed from a timid teacher into a skilled operative. One of Marie-Claire's most daring missions involved sabotaging the railway lines used by the Nazis to transport troops and supplies. Under cover of night, she and her comrades placed explosives on the tracks, disrupting German movements and buying precious time for Allied operations. These acts of defiance were fraught with danger. Capture meant torture, deportation to concentration camps, or execution. The moral complexities of resistance weighed heavily on Marie-Claire. She faced impossible choices, whether to sacrifice a few for the many, how to protect innocent civilians caught in reprisals, and the constant fear of betrayal. Yet, she drew strength from the stories of those who had lost everything but still fought on. Jewish families hidden in safe houses, partisans who risked death to smuggle weapons, and everyday citizens who refused to bow to tyranny. Women played an essential but often overlooked role in the resistance. Marie-Claire's involvement highlighted the shifting gender dynamics of wartime France. She balanced her covert activities with the expectations placed upon her as a woman, maintaining appearances, caring for neighbors, and shielding her involvement from suspicion. The courage and ingenuity of women like her challenged traditional roles and laid groundwork for future social change. The tide began to turn with the Allied landings in Normandy in June 1944. The resistance stepped up their sabotage efforts, coordinating strikes and uprisings to support Operation Overlord. Marie-Claire participated in liberating her neighborhood, joining forces with Free French fighters under General Charles de Gaulle. The city erupted in celebration, but the cost was high. Countless comrades had fallen, and the scars of occupation ran deep. After Paris was freed, Marie-Claire helped rebuild schools and communities shattered by war. Yet the memory of the resistance remained vivid, a reminder of the bravery and sacrifice that had fueled the fight for freedom. She dedicated her post-war years to educating future generations about the importance of vigilance against tyranny. Roses of the Resistance tells the story of those who refused to be silenced, who chose courage over fear in a time of darkness. Through Marie-Claire Dubois's journey, we glimpse the human face of underground warfare, the risks, the losses, and the unwavering hope that even in the bleakest moments, the flame of liberty can never be extinguished. Deep beneath the quiet hills of Los Alamos, New Mexico, a secret war was being fought, not with guns or tanks, but with equations, experiments, and the raw power of the atom. It was here, in the heart of the Manhattan Project, that a group of the world's brightest scientists raced against time to unlock the terrifying potential of nuclear energy. Among them was Dr. Eleanor Sinclair, a physicist whose work would shape the course of history and the dawn of the atomic age. Eleanor had come to Los Alamos in 1943, recruited from a prestigious university where she had made a name for herself in theoretical physics. The project's goal was unprecedented: to build an atomic bomb before Nazi Germany could develop one first. The stakes were enormous, and the pressure suffocating. The laboratory was a fortress of secrecy, guarded by armed sentries, where every word was measured and every visitor scrutinized. The scientists, including luminaries like Robert Oppenheimer and Enrico Fermi, worked in feverish collaboration and competition. Eleanor specialized in neutron behavior, a crucial element in sustaining the chain reaction that would unleash nuclear destruction. Days blurred into nights as calculations were checked and rechecked, and experiments teetered on the brink of catastrophe. The moral weight of their mission was never far from Eleanor's mind. The promise of ending the war was shadowed by the realization that their creation could obliterate entire cities and cause suffering on an unimaginable scale. Debates among the scientists ranged from pragmatic necessity to ethical despair. Eleanor found herself torn between her duty as a patriot and her conscience as a humanist. As testing progressed, the team achieved a breakthrough: the design of a plutonium bomb, Fat Man, and a uranium bomb, Little Boy. The first full-scale test, code-named Trinity, took place on July 16, 1945, in the New Mexico desert. Eleanor stood miles away from the blast site, watching as a blinding flash lit up the sky, followed by a towering mushroom cloud. The force was staggering, a powerful reminder of the destructive power they had unleashed. The bombs were soon deployed in the Pacific Theater. On August 6 and 9, 1945, the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were devastated, ending the war with Japan but at a horrific cost of civilian lives. Eleanor received the news with a conflicted heart, relief that the conflict had ended, but sorrow for the devastation wrought by the weapons she helped create. In the war's aftermath, Eleanor became an advocate for nuclear disarmament and international cooperation. The dawn of the atomic age brought new fears: the Cold War arms race, the threat of global annihilation, and the challenge of controlling such immense power. Her efforts helped lay the groundwork for the United Nations' role in promoting peace and preventing future nuclear conflict. Shadows of the Manhattan Project reveals the tension between scientific progress and ethical responsibility. Eleanor Sinclair's story highlights the human element behind one of history's most transformative and terrifying innovations, a reminder that even in the pursuit of victory, the costs of war extend far beyond the battlefield. The echoes of these forgotten battles and whispered sacrifices linger still, a chilling reminder that behind every victory lies a cost too heavy to bear. The shadows we uncover today are not just relics of the past, they haunt the present, warning us of the peril when fear, fanaticism, and secrecy collide. To look away is to forget. To remember is to bear witness to the true horrors that war hides in its darkest corners.